Thanks. Hi there. Thank you so much. Oh, this is already working. OK, gotcha. Perfect. So thanks so much, Leah, for the kind introduction. Thanks for coming out. It's a pleasure to be here. Really cool location. I've always passed by, I think, 1,000 times just in front with a bicycle. Never been inside, so it's really cool. What we want to do today, though, is discuss some more serious aspects of AI that sit at the intersection, I should say, perhaps, of the twin transitions that at the moment are driving a lot of the change proposals and also the fissures that we're seeing across society. That is, on the one hand, digitization and AI, and on the other hand, climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation. So I want to take you through this program in 3 gentle steps in all brevity, and first talk a little bit about the general connection between AI and climate, with a particular focus on the impact of AI on climate itself, which so far has been a little bit under-researched and under-reflected, I think. Then pivot toward regulation and ask what the law and at the moment and also in the future is actually doing to address some of these risks. And we shall then take a look into the future to see where these difficult challenges might be headed next and what might be coming up. So let's start right away with a few reflections on AI and climate. It is fairly conventional knowledge that AI can, of course, be used to all kinds of benefits to address problems related to climate change. So there are pattern recognition models that are monitoring satellite images to detect when forests get depleted or desertification is starting to grow in Africa. There is models that try to help with emergency response in cases of extreme weather events driven by climate change. There's all kinds of things you can do with AI to help in both climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. What has been overlooked a little bit in the last decade, and is now only starting to be recognized by computer scientists across the world, is the connection between AI itself and sustainability or climate change. Namely, the fact that AI itself, as you all know probably, does consume a lot of energy and also some significant amounts of water. And the question is how this actually plays out in practice. And if it is there, what can be done to mitigate those problems, both from a market and from a regulatory perspective? Now, the good news is that, of course, every company has a huge incentive, if they are developing AI, to bring down energy and water costs, because they are paying for it. So as a matter of first assessment, it seems that the incentives of society and companies might actually be quite well aligned. But if you look a little bit closer, some problems lurk around the corner. So there's a couple of articles that came out following long-standing research, years of research by fantastic people like Sasha Lucioni and others in the New York Times, for example, that showed that in the past years, the electricity demand in the US had been quite flat, but it's now rising again, and guess what's driving this? A lot of this is being driven by data centers that are built across the US and actually also across Europe. This is not a bad thing per se. Of course, we need data centers to be able to drive digitization forward, but the fact that we have so many of them that Google and Microsoft had now had to scale back their carbon zero targets for 2030 actually should give us pause. And there is more to this in terms of environmental implications because, of course, many of these data centers are being built in places where there's a lot of sunshine so that you can actually get solar and other renewable energy. Again, that's good, but it also means that it's often in a place, or sometimes it's in a place where there is not a lot of water. And that water is needed, desperately needed by data centers. Do you know why? For cooling, right? For cooling the data centers. And now you might say, well, you know, if it's just being put in there, then it cools it, and then it goes out. It's a little warmer, so what's the problem? But a lot of it evaporates, actually. So the water is actually lost. And you can imagine cities like Las Vegas and others who are already drying up, fighting for water with these data centers. So that's a problem. And if we look at it from a more statistical perspective, this is a concern that is relevant and more relevant than many people think. If you look at ICT, so information and communication technology in general, you can say that, and those are estimates from 2021, okay, so the real rate is probably much higher, that the contribution to global GHG greenhouse gas emissions is 1.8 to 3.9%. You might say that's actually not a lot. But in fact, if you look at air travel, and this is something that, people tend to point at all the time in order to bring down, climate costs. You can't fly to Australia anymore and stuff, which is not wrong. I mean, but there's a lot of focus, a little bit irrational focus, I guess, on air travel. That's actually likely more than air travel. And the GHG emissions, they're going through the roof. And this is where I think we start seeing a problem, a kind of market failure, where companies at the moment have to engage in a race to be #1 on the AI leaderboard. So they throw all resources that they have to building the next big model, GPT-5, Llama 4, whatever it may be, irrespective of how much energy that is going to cost, because they know that in the end, they will only get the next round of financing if this comes through. It's true that there's a lot of work on smaller models, there's a lot of work on more efficient models, and so I'm saying there is a huge potential to team up with industry to get this done, but the direction of travel of the large models is still, to me, quite concerning. And you can see that there are now recent estimates that say that in a median trajectory, a median uptake of large language models and other types of Gen AI, transformer-based models, actually that are highly energy intensive across industry, for example, integration and search. If you look at this medium trajectory, they will have GHG emissions equivalent to countries like Argentina or the Netherlands by the year of 2023. Somebody else is speaking also, that's pretty cool. Anyways, I used to play around a lot. I love Gen AI for many things, and I used to play around a lot with it on Sundays, sometimes, with family, generate a story, generate an image. But then I came across this study that showed that a lot of the GHG emissions are actually not driven by training. You used to think, well, it's these big models, they're trained, and that's heavily cost and compute intensive, and then, well, each single query can't be that much. Turns out, you use one image from a state-of-the-art image generator, and it consumes as much energy as once charging your entire smartphone. If you have 100 million and more users, you can imagine these numbers picking up pretty swiftly. And Sasha Lucioni, she's actually at Hugging Face, she's climate lead at Hugging Face, and they found that for the large models, within 6 months, very easily, and probably before, inference takes over and is much more important in terms of energy driver rather than training. And so that is, I think, a problem that we still need to confront. And there are, as I said, potential mitigation mechanisms. Of course, AI can be used to, for all kinds of things, as I said in the beginning, to mitigate and adapt to climate change. But oftentimes, those will not be the applications that involve Gen AI, which is the main driver of cost in terms of GHG emissions. So many of these applications are, simple linear regression models, your old school neural networks, pattern recognition systems, but not the kind of Gen AI tools that nicely spit out all kinds of images, but that are not very useful, at least for as much as I know, in building climate adaptation models. And finally, there's one cost that is often overlooked, and I don't want to sound too negative, but I think it's important to put all of this on the table. There's one cost that concerns the AI applications themselves. There was an article just very recently, just 1 week ago. I was just in the US when this came out last week, where we had a big workshop on this in DC, where Karen Hao showed that based on internal documents, Microsoft actually very heavily pitched their AI to ExxonMobil and to other oil and gas companies to enable them to drill in a better and more efficient way. And that, of course, has massive implications for GHG emissions as well, and it's not accounted for in climate reporting at the moment. So what can we do about it? It is a regulatory problem, I think, because of this divergence between what is the individual optimum for companies in some of these cases, and on the other hand, the societal optimum that we seek to achieve as a society. But at the moment, as I've pointed out in a number of publications, it is a blind spot in regulation, because we have AI regulation on the one hand, which is fairly detached from environmental law on the other hand. So that is a problem for the AI policy and law space in and of itself. The AI Act, you thought, might change some of this. And in fact, I was working pretty closely with the EU Parliament and also with the German federal government while this was being negotiated. And I try to push more incentives toward sustainable AI into the AI Act. Not all of this was successful. So let me just tell you what's in there right now. So just as a matter in terms, in case we have international guests here, yes, it applies to non-EU companies as well. And we have two main pillars in terms of what the AI Act says about sustainable AI. One is about climate reporting, transparency, so providers of foundation models and all kinds of foundation models, they have to disclose energy consumption for training or development of the models. And the providers of high-risk AI systems, they don't have to provide the exact energy, but they have to describe how much compute they use to build the model, and you can derive energy usually from compute. The problem is that these documents are not open to public scrutiny. They are to be submitted to the AI office and to downstream providers, but not put somewhere on a website where actually people could have a look at it. And companies like NVIDIA and others, they're working on model cards that might eventually get us toward a greater public scrutiny of this process, but I think that that's actually one thing that is absolutely missing, as we are pointing out in a recent paper that I authored with people from Hasso-Plattner Institute who actually do work precisely at the intersection of AI and sustainability. So public reporting to build up market pressure and reputational concerns is, I think, one thing that we desperately need. We also need to include open source foundation models, because open source foundation models at the moment are exempt from these very climate reporting obligations, which is bizarre. Because if you think of it, you might think, open source is kind of 2 or 3 people sitting down there in a garage, building up some foundation model. Now, obviously, this is not, this is Meta, this is the United Arab Emirates. It's not the kind of players you would want to spare in terms of regulation, perhaps. For all of the benefits that these models bring, and the risk, we can have a long discussion on that too. And finally, as I said, inference, that's the largest driver of climate costs at the moment. And that is totally omitted by climate reporting at the moment. So here we have a real mismatch between what contemporary climate and computer science tells us and the regulatory parameters in the AI Act. Now, you might say, well, transparency, that's nice and fine, but that's not going to get us anywhere. We've had reporting obligations, how good is my fridge in terms of energy efficiency, the car, and so on. Has that helped much in climate change? Well, perhaps a marginal effect, but yeah. The planet is still in a crisis. So transparency alone will certainly not get us anywhere. Which is why some people, including me and others from Climate Change AI, by the way, it's a great organization founded by a couple of computer science professors. So we pushed for some sustainability impact assessments so that companies, when building AI models, would be required to look not only at performance metrics and other types of bias metrics, fairness metrics, but also at sustainability and impact metrics. Now, this is something that was in the AI Act when the European Parliament made its proposal last June, but was kicked out at the very end of the negotiations. However, I want to suggest that actually we have language in the AI Act that can be interpreted in such a way still, so that we have kind of a Trojan horse in there, which forces providers to still engage in sustainability impact assessments. How this? Well, here's how the reasoning goes. We have providers of foundation models, general purpose AI models, they're called in the AI Act, and of high-risk models that need to mitigate risks. They need to mitigate risk to fundamental rights. Now, if you're a law geek, any law geeks around here? Any EU lawyers in the room? No, not too many. Okay, doesn't matter. So if you were a law geek, like some of my friends and I, you would know that environmental protection is not a fundamental right in the EU. It's actually only a principle, which makes a difference because you cannot easily, it's more difficult to bring cases under this provision. But the AI Act kind of mislabels this. So apparently the people who wrote the AI Act didn't even know about this. And they said, well, you need to look at fundamental rights, including environmental protection, which actually is, from a legal perspective, kind of wrong. But it's now in there. So basically what it says, you have to look at all kinds of things, including environmental protection. And if that's what you need to look at and mitigate, I think there is a clear obligation right now, which will hopefully also influence the code of practice that is being developed right now by the AI office. And some of you in the room might also be in the working group. I might see you on Monday then, when we have the first plenary meeting on drafting the code of practice for foundation model providers in the EU. So this is one of the things where I think the AI Act goes a little further than you might have initially thought, but still there is quite a bit missing, particularly in climate reporting and also in other things. What might be those desirable action points going forward? Now I think here's one question I want to put to you, basically. We have emission limits, we have an emissions trading system in place in the EU with respect to a lot of different high emissions industries, old school industries, right? So it's steel, it's shipping, it's you name it, and it's aviation. But as we've just seen, the climate impact of AI is very likely very close to or even greater than aviation. So if aviation is included in the ETS, the emissions trading system, perhaps AI processes should be included in this too. That is a question. Why is it a question? Because actually, the reason why aviation is included in the emissions trading system is that an airplane burns fuel, right? So it directly causes emissions. Whilst the AI system does not burn fuel. It consumes energy, but that energy might have actually been priced in at production in an emissions trading system of its own. That's only half the logic, though, because we have what's called carbon leakage. So a lot of the energy might be produced in places where the data centers are, where there is no functioning emissions trading system. So there was a study by Bloomberg a couple of weeks ago that showed that, of course, data centers are spread all over the world, and many of these countries just don't have any functioning emissions trading system. So still, there is a bit of an issue of double taxation, as it were, if you wanted to include AI directly in the emissions trading system. But it's still a question we might have to ask as a society. Is an AI model that is trained for, say, being extremely good at playing three-dimensional ego shooter games, does that compel the same energy budget as, say, an AI model that is used for cancer screening? I don't think so, but it's difficult to draw the line, and in fact, so those are some of the debates we're going to have going forward, I think. So we need to set, some way or another, workable financial incentives for companies to bring down energy costs, even for those largest models that are now the very rage of competition. How can we do that? Well, one thing for sure is that transparency needs to be better standardized. One of the reasons why sustainability in the AI Act was not made a more prominent factor is that it's hard at the moment to measure the climate and energy costs of AI systems and to compare it, because there is no universally accepted metric. We're discussing this in the latest paper that we've written, and I think standardization is the key for getting us better results here. Cumulative server-level reporting requirements, for example, would help a lot. Second one is renewable energy targets, which is something that under the Energy Efficiency Directive of the EU, we already now have, which is being integrated into German law. And you might have seen that actually Bitcoin was quite active in the negotiations as well, and this is something that will apply to German data centers. Problem being that there's only a finite amount of renewable energy, of course, in place, and so we might want to couple this the renewable targets with an obligation, at least for the biggest companies, of actually financing new sources of renewable energy, because otherwise we will simply run out of the renewable energy that we are required to use for the data centers. And finally, there is this discussion that we need to engage in as a society in terms of what kind of processes do we want to allocate carbon budgets to? Do we want to have carbon budgets at all or not? Just like the mileage limits that we have, sometimes the gasoline mileage limits that we have for cars, right? So that was an incentive for car makers to bring down the effective amount of gas that cars use up during travel by setting hard ceilings. And I think as climate change gets worse, we need think about new ways of tackling these problems in AI and in other industries such as metaverse, blockchain, and so forth. So let me just conclude by saying the future will be exciting. It will be particularly exciting when looking at this dual transition of AI and climate change, where AI can be used to a lot of great purposes. And again, I want to stress this. I think this is one of the key technologies that we have to actually combat and master climate change. But we need to make sure that it is implemented in a responsible and sustainable way. Otherwise, we won't make progress on these important fronts. Many thanks. We have an expert consortium if you want to check that out. We often run conferences on this. Thank you so much for your attention. Looking forward to the rest of the program.